Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Friday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great. And I hope everyone enjoyed actual live football being played yesterday, the Lovey Smith Bowl. What a great time that was. Probably. We are recording this on a Wednesday, so I, in fact, don't know how many touchdowns T-Bag threw for, but I can imagine it was a good time. But again, very special edition of the Fantasy Life Show because to conclude running back week, wanted to bring on one of the best individuals in our industry, one of the most accurate people in our industry, which I would say matters when we're trying to, make good predictions and win fantasy football championships. So without further ado, guys, let me introduce lead fantasy analyst over at The Score, Justin Boone. My man, you have finished top 7 in the most accurate experts competition, and each of the last 7 years, pretty good, my friend. Good to have you on again.
I appreciate you having me. I will correct it is each of my last 7 years in that contest because I did
Ah,
retire from that contest a couple of years ago. So it's been nice not having that added stress on top of everything, but doing good. I love this time of year. Love chatting with you. I feel like it's been a while since you and I have done this, and it is incredibly fun to come on as the guest. I know I've had you on my show, I think every year for the last like 6 years. And I love just jumping into the room beforehand and getting to joke around and not have to worry about keeping things on track the whole time, which is going to be a tough job for you because I know I get quite chatty, especially when we're talking about running backs.
Bro, I mean, it's the Fantasy Life Show. We can talk about whatever we want here. Who cares what the producer notes say? I'm just kidding. Producers love you guys. But yeah, guys, again, Justin does great stuff over at The Score. I've loved going on his podcast over the year. You can find him again as lead host of The Score Fantasy Football Podcast. So great stuff over there. But yeah, man, getting into some freaking running backs because we have been doing running back week over here. And let's face it, even if the NFL loves to ignore the position, they do tend to be some of the most important players in all of fantasy football. So Justin, I know we are recording this at the end of July, so still plenty of time to get into redraft mode and everything. But just so far throughout this offseason, who have been your most drafted running backs that you found yourself getting?
Well, and I don't know how deep we want to go on these guys because we're going to have the whole show to talk about a bunch of them. But Jonathan Taylor is one that at the beginning of the offseason, I didn't necessarily think I would be back in on. And then as we've gone along here, I've just been more and more excited about him. I think he's primed for a bounce back year in that exciting Colts offense. Anthony Richardson back, and that offense is going to be so dangerous with him. Shane Steichen running that up tempo attack. It's going to be a lot of scoring opportunities, a lot of volume there, and not a lot of competition for Taylor. And last year, I mean, you look at what Taylor did. I know he came back, he had the contract issues, he had some injury stuff, right? Like that kind of derailed him a bit. The year before, injuries again. So it's kind of been 2 seasons since we've really seen him crush it. But man, I mean, you look at last year, he averaged the third most fantasy points per game over the final 12 weeks of the season because he missed the first 4 weeks, 5 and 6, that kind of eased him back in. And then from that point on, was the third best fantasy back. You go back to 2021, the last time he was completely healthy, the RB2 overall in fantasy that year in fantasy points per game. So I think this guy has an immense ceiling. I think he could definitely finish as the top running back overall in fantasy. And I really love him. I took him the other night at the 12th spot, round one in a pros versus Joe's draft, just trying to mix it up, trying to go different when you're at the end of the first round. It's a little tricky, right? You got to kind of throw a Hail Mary a bit there. So went with him, but really like Taylor in the second round where you can get him. Devon Achan, the upside and the downside are there. I'm sure you guys have talked about it on this show. But you look at him as a guy that averaged the fourth most fantasy points per game among running backs last year. Over the course of the entire season, he finished as the RB24. So if people are just looking at those year-end totals, might not be as excited. But you have him in that Mike McDaniel rushing attack. We know that it's going to produce. He's kind of like the perfect guy for that. And we saw what he could do last season. So if he can stay healthy this year, on top of the fact that Raheem Mostert is 32, he's been healthy. The last couple of seasons, we've seen his durability questions go away a little bit, but at 32 years old, how much longer can Mostert keep this up? They have Jalen Wright, who I think would step in, but the thing about Achan is he doesn't need 20 touches a game. He only had 20 touches in a game last year once. He's a guy that can get it done on 15 touches per game. He had the fourth most runs of 20 plus yards last year, and he did it on just 103 carries. So he's definitely a guy. I mean, there's a bunch we could mention. I think some of the Blake Corum, Kyron Williams stuff, I think that's a little overblown. Kyron Williams is somebody that I've been scooping up as his ADP's been falling. Isaiah Pacheco, not as much competition in that backfield. Jerick McKinnon's gone.
Mhm.
He is going to have a lot of volume, and defenses are going to have to account for all those new passing weapons that they're going to have in Kansas City this year. So I think Pacheco's set up really well. And then James Conner, who we'll probably talk about a couple times during this show, a guy that when he's healthy is always producing and is somebody who I just absolutely love drafting. You can get him so late this year.
And it's funny because, yeah, you listed a lot of running backs I think a lot of people are going to generally in their top 12. But when you're into some of these lobbies, man, particularly the best ball oriented ones, but even, depending on your redraft site, you do see guys like Jonathan Taylor. I mean, you said it, you got him at the 112, man. He'll be available in the early parts of round two. And like, is there a line where you are willing to go ahead and take on the Jonathan Taylors, the Saquon Barkleys? Because, I don't think I'm breaking news to you about just the fact that we have seen running backs with high end dual threat quarterbacks struggle to get the same, touchdown upside near the goal line and not catch as many passes because their quarterbacks are taken off. But, as much as I've looked at the past data of running backs attached to these high volume quarterbacks, it's like once you get past the top, I'd say six wide receivers, especially, AJ Brown's kind of like where I'm cutting it off, where, yeah, I still like my Garrett Wilsons, my Puka Nakuas and stuff, but man, I can get Nico Collins, I can get Brandon Ayuk, deeper, around later or so. I feel like the wide receiver kind of 8 to almost like wide receiver 15, 16 overall, not the same, but you could make a statement that it's a longer tier. And at some point, I'm just like, you know what? Give me the really good NFL running back that we're pretty confident is going to rack up 300 plus touches. So, how again do kind of the available wide receivers influence when you're ready to take JT?
So normally I'm not giving the advice that you should be taking him at the 112. I did that. That's a pros versus Joes league. A
Uh,
lot of smart people in that league. So you kind of have to go a different direction in that one
sure.
sometimes to win it. So I think where you can get him right now, like the mid second round, is often where Taylor ends up. I've seen him go really everywhere in the second round, depending on drafts. I've even gotten him in the late second round in
Yeah.
some. I guess that's how out some people are on him. But it's really the early second round when I start to consider him. And you said the top six. I mean, I would throw Wilson and Nakua in there
Yeah.
as receivers that I'm definitely going to take over him in the first round. But as soon as you get to the top of the second, it gets to the point where it's, are you betting on Marvin Harrison Jr. really coming in and having a monster wide receiver one season? I think he can do it, but do you go with him or do you go with a running back that's going to be in this really prolific offense? Or at least that's what I'm projecting. So that's where I would go with somebody like Taylor. Barkley and others, I want them to fall a little bit further to the mid second round, a little bit lower on them, but they are guys that I'm looking at. And when I'm looking at my running back strategy overall this year, it's not, I mentioned a bunch of guys that go at the top. It's not that I'm piling on and taking all these running backs. I still tend to go with like that anchor RB or hero RB
Mhm.
approach. Grab one of these guys in the first three, maybe even 4 rounds, because there's a couple of these guys that do fall that I think still could be pretty good
Yeah.
RB1s on your team. And then surround them with high end receivers in the other rounds early. And then start to look at, round 5, round 6, start to look at some of the quarterbacks, the elite quarterbacks and the elite tight ends. You basically have to take one of those top tight ends
Right.
by round 6. At that point, you're going to miss out on all the. Maybe George Kittle will fall a little bit further. It's kind of been weird this year with him. But overall, you got to grab those guys in the first 6 rounds or so if you're planning on getting one of those. And then after that, you come back and you look at running back, and in the 7th, 8th, 9th round, there are legitimate starters this year that you can get there. And I'm happy to fill out the RB1 slot and basically the rest of my starting lineup, and then come back around and get that RB2 in the 7th, 8th, 9th round and really start to focus on running back at that point and load up as much as I can the rest of the way, including, not just guys that I think could be legit RB2s out of the gate, but of course, all those really high end backups, the Trey Bensons and Marshawn
Yeah.
Lloyds and, all those types of players, Corum, who I already touched on there. You come around and you get those guys, after round 10 or so, and you fill up your bench. And to me, that's just the obvious way to build this season.
It's a great shout and something that Chris Allen and myself were actually going through this morning because we were kind of forcing the strategy in the mock draft, which you don't want to do in actual drafts, but just trying to see what different roster constructions might look like if you're doing, robust RB versus hero RB versus zero RB. And yeah, let me tell you what, use your first three picks on running backs, and lo and behold, the rest of your roster is going to have a really hard time catching back up. So I'm with you, preferring hero RB at this point in time. But yeah, remember, guys, doesn't necessarily mean you have to use the first round pick. You're going to have chances of getting a guy like Jonathan Taylor in round two. And if he's gone, you don't need to force it because you can get your Pacheco's or your ETNs potentially later. But yeah, just kind of tying knot on the JT talk. I mean, don't underestimate the potential to get him really in round two and have the capability to still get another wide receiver one down the line. I mean, ESPN ADP, which is where the most people seem to play fantasy football. So we're going to have to be studying this, Marvin Harrison Jr. goes pick 25. Drake London pick 36. And I feel like I'm beating a dead horse shouting this out, but so be it. Keep killing that freaking horse because, guys, Drake London round three is one of the biggest single site mismatches in all of fantasy right now. So good stuff on JT. And then also Devin Achane, someone where, I've heard my friends in my home league talking about it. Just he's too small. I feel like last year's flash in the pan, going to get hurt type of sentiment from a lot of people out there. And it's not that he can't get hurt. A lot of running backs tend to get hurt every single year, obviously. But, I do wonder if Achane, just by virtue of being small, if he is one of these guys where we're actually getting the discount because people just tend to over kind of state the injury potential for certain guys and then not account for it at all with others. I mean, Justin, even if it is like we'll call it 20% chance that Achane actually plays all 17 games and that he actively, gets 15 plus carries and targets per game and he's really good and stuff. Man, that's a 20% chance you're getting a complete league breaking player in round two or even usually round three of some of these drafts, man. So Devin Achane, again, there's some risks there, but there's risks with a lot of running backs, and a lot of those running backs don't have the tantalizing ceiling that we already saw with Devin Achane.
Yeah, and for me, I do a fantasy strength of schedule matrix every year. On top of the fact that we love that Dolphins rushing attack, they have the third easiest fantasy running back schedule this season.
Ooh.
So in my mind, we see things kind of coming together here. You want to have that special season, you need all these elements to kind of slide into place. And when you look at Mostert's age, when you look at the talent and what we saw in flashes from Achane last year, you look at that easy schedule, a little bit of a downgrade on the line, which is unfortunate, but in that system, they can kind of make up for it with the scheme, right? So I'm very, very excited. And I say that as a Bills fan, right? I don't want to see the Dolphins doing well, but guess what? I'm expecting really big things from Achane this season.
Hey man, worst case, so you can kick back with a couple of those Labatt Blues and maybe watch Devin Achane lead the fantasy squad to some championships. But yeah, ADP right now 33 on ESPN, pick 23 on Sleeper, pick 29 on Yahoo. So again, guys, I think Justin laid out some of those great hero RB targets well. Chance to get JT in round two, or if you miss out, you're still going to have a chance for guys like Achane, maybe like a Travis Etienne, or even or an Isaiah Pacheco on the way back around. So good stuff there. And before we continue going on, guys, I want to give a shout out to our Fantasy Life Plus product. Fantasy Life Plus is the Fantasy Life premium product, and we have two tiers for you, one of which is cheaper. But, guys, guess what? Now they're all that expensive. As I continue to preach, cheaper than a Chipotle burrito per month. Really should become, friends or sponsors for Chipotle with all this attention I'm giving them. I do love you, Chipotle, if you happen to be listening. But back to the main subject Fantasy Life Plus. Yes, guys, again, all of our consensus ranks, projections, and really just a tool suite that I think rivals anyone out there in the industry. I mean, just alone what Dwayne's doing with the utilization hub, if you guys have seen that at all, so huge, not just for trying to figure out what's going on in backfields, but also team styles. And then, the start sit tool, who's in, who's out, the splits and everything like that. So many possibilities. Coolest thing that I've talked about a bunch already is our draft champion tool, which again gives you the opportunity to build your mock drafts completely customized to your league settings with keepers, with however many flexes, whatever weird league settings you have. I'm pretty sure that we have a chance to fill it up. And it's for a redraft, for best ball, and even dynasty, which I know is really hard a lot of times to find a good tool for that out there. So Fantasy Life Plus, guys, check it out. All right, Justin. So we've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but let's get back into kind of the hero RB mindset and just the idea of like what general running back strategy do we most prefer given expected ADPs? And look, when you get out there, a lot of weird things can happen. Your drunk friend can all of a sudden take Jonathan Taylor first overall. And yeah, that might go ahead and change, how you're approaching the rest of your fantasy draft. But the way I like to think of it is if you are going into a 12, team draft, regular redraft, pretty base scoring rules, and you have a chance to build your roster basically how you might expect to be able to given the ADPs, but you're able to like not get sniped because the fantasy gods are in your favor in this exercise. So with that in mind, what general RB strategy do you most prefer given those expected ADPs? And if it is just hero RB again, just kind of talk about like the benefits of taking one running back early and how that kind of opens up the rest of your roster.
Well, sometimes the frustrating thing is in regular leagues, it depends where you're picking, right? There's some guys that
Yeah.
you're just not going to have a chance to get. And that's why I like auction leagues quite a bit. I try to
Ooh.
convince most of my friends in home leagues to switch over to those. It's very difficult to get them to do. So if you're picking near the top or the middle of the first round, there's three running backs. There's those three guys that I think I've been pushing up my board. CMC's been my 101. Again, I know all the talk that, running backs rarely go back to back as the top scoring RB, but CMC, you can't go away from him. You got to bet on him again in that offense with the things that he's done. You look at the next two guys, and for me, it's Brees Hall and Bijan Robinson. I think industry wide, it's pretty much that now. Both of those guys have a chance to unseat CMC. There's a situation where either of those guys could finish ahead of him. And I think they're the kind of players that we're looking for because there's not that many running backs anymore that are going to get these big workhorse roles. And I know there was a Tyler Algier news story that came out this week suggesting that he is going to get a bunch of volume. I think that's going to be significantly overblown because they've also
Agreed.
said things about how they're going to try to get Bijan Robinson the ball as much as they possibly can this year, right? So it's a lot of just camp talk. And what are coaches supposed to say when they get asked about a player? They're not just going to suggest, yeah, he's going to be sitting on the bench the whole time. They want to keep that guy involved and excited. So I don't think we can overreact to something like that. But talent wise, scheme wise, some of the changes that we've seen in these offenses, two really veteran quarterbacks stepping in. Rodgers was there last year, but didn't actually get to play most of the season. Kirk Cousins going to Atlanta. Both of those offenses are going to be so much better. And I think that's going to help the running backs as well. And those guys are fantastic picks if you're picking earlier, if they fall to the mid first round. After that, I normally will not take another running back in the first round. I'll wait coming back around. And like I said, round two, round three, maybe even round four, I'm looking at guys like Taylor and Saquon and Kyron, Achan. And then sometimes, and I think you mentioned them earlier, Pacheco, Etienne, those guys fall a little bit further, but I think they're legit be your fantasy team that you can get at a bit of a discount. And it's okay because you've just spent the first three rounds loading up on, fantastic elite wide receivers to be the core of your team there. After that, I'm kind of waiting. There's a bit of a, if we want to call it the dead zone this year, for me, it's like round 5, round 6. I normally don't dip into running backs at that point. I'm kind of still looking at receivers. I'm looking at tight ends. I'm looking at quarterbacks potentially. Anthony Richardson being one of them that kind of lands
Oh,
in
yeah.
that range that I often take. And then you come back around, and I mentioned before, round 7, round 8, round 9. There are so many guys in that range this year. I love James Conner. Ramondre Stevenson is someone that I think people are really down on, and I get the concerns about the offensive line, but things can't be worse in New England than they were the last couple of seasons there, right? It's
Knock on
got to get
wood. Knock
better.
on wood, please.
I know there's just no possible way that it can be worse. They fix the quarterback situation. They bring in some exciting pass catching weapons, these young guys, and some veteran guys to potentially fill some gaps there as well. A new coaching staff, all that sort of stuff, in my mind, is going to come together for Stevenson to have a decent year. And they just committed to him. They've told us what they think about him. They gave him a contract. They want him to be around for a little longer. So he's another guy. Jonathan Brooks, you're not probably going to get what you want from him for the first month or so, but he's somebody that I'm willing to take in that range because I think when it matters most for fantasy, he's going to
Yeah.
be there for you in the second half of the season, a potential 3 down back, and another offense that I think is going to go from bottom of the barrel to even just middle of the pack. Dave Canales
Yeah.
there, the investments they've made in the offensive line. There's a lot of things that I think you can get excited about that Panthers attack, not necessarily becoming an elite unit, but all we need is just average to see somebody like Brooks potentially break out in the second half of the season. And after that, even going into the ninth, 10th round, Tajay Spears, Tony Pollard. I know we're talking about a potential split there. We could see one of those guys step up. I tend to take Spears because he's normally the cheaper of the two. I really
Mhm.
like him as a player, what we saw from him last year. The fact that he was able to come in as a rookie, look like he belonged, and actually take some work away from Derrick Henry, right? He caught 52 balls last year. Like that was pretty impressive that he came in and had that kind of role as a rookie next to someone like that. On top of the fact that this is another team, and this is how I'm trying to look for value, which teams are going to change a lot from what people saw last year. And the Titans might be one of the top teams on that list, bringing in Brian Callahan, continuing to invest in that offensive line, changing to now probably more of a pass centric offense versus what we've seen with that Derrick Henry fueled attack in past years. It's going to be a lot different for Tennessee. A lot of pieces have to come together and build chemistry and gel. But I'm excited about that backfield and what they could possibly do. And I'm taking shots on both of those guys in that range just because of how cheap they are. Brian Robinson is somebody else that everything that they're saying in Washington is that to me, he is still the number one back. Austin Eckler is going to fill that Antonio Gibson kind of role. He's at a different phase in his career. He'll be involved, but he's more of that complementary option. Brian Robinson is the early down back. He's going to be that goal line guy, and he's somebody that you can get very cheap outside of the top 30 backs. I see him as having a legitimate shot to be a low end RB2 this year, and you can get him in like the 10th round or so.
Mhm.
And then we talked earlier about some of these backups, the really high end guys that we're confident if they get that opportunity, they could run with it. Trey Benson on the Cardinals, Marshawn Lloyd on the Packers, Zach Charbonnet going back to last year, somebody that we're just waiting for him to really get his opportunity. And when he got a chance last year in Seattle, he was pretty good with it. So
Yeah.
hoping that he can get more of a chance. A Ty Chandler, that's not necessarily a bet on Chandler being a great talent, but on Aaron Jones being at a different point in his career and having some injuries in recent seasons and going to a new team. Often when the Packers let these veterans go, they do it at the right time, and it means that that guy's on the downside of his career. So I worry about that with Aaron Jones, whether he's going to be able to stay healthy and how much that's just going to be more of a tandem backfield, like how Tennessee is talking about their running backs, because we've seen a lot of the players in Minnesota suggesting that that's going to be the case, that it's 1A, 1B. So Ty Chandler, I mean, there are just a ton of running backs once you get outside, the top 10 rounds that you can
Mhm.
grab that are really upside guys. And the receivers in that range, it is much harder to hit on a receiver at that point that's going to turn into a weekly fantasy starter for you. So I want to build my team in a way that I can turn at the end of the draft and just be loading up that bench with those backup running backs.
And I do think, just first of all, great rundown of really, the entire draft strategy when you are trying to get these running backs. But it's not only that we have some red flags with those middle round running backs, kind of like to me, it's almost the Alvin Kamara, Rashad White, Kenneth Walker, Aaron Jones sort of tier where look, I'm not discounting that there's, isn't a path to success for those running backs. They should be the lead backs. We've seen good years from them in the past. Maybe Father Time isn't here just yet. But you look at those offensive lines, and more of them than not are ranked towards the bottom of the league. We're not expecting that much scoring upside out of those offenses. So when we start moving down the list and guys going rounds later, like Ramondre Stevenson, like Jonathan Brooks, like the Steelers running backs, all of a sudden it's like, are we that much more confident in those previous, the Kamaras, the Kenneth Walkers of the world? Are we sure they're that much better talents to warrant going multiple rounds ahead? Because you better be, because not only are you making a bet on arguably a similar RB archetype, but you're also missing out on the opportunity for the dual threat alien quarterbacks and for the elite tight ends that are absolutely not going to be there later in the draft. So again, guys, it's just trying to find that right balance. And to Justin's point, don't need to be going into every single draft with one concrete strategy. You should be playing the board as it comes to you. But yeah, man, I mean, really through rounds 9 through 12, like if you just had to say, like, okay, we're drafting and we're only doing like ADP players between rounds 9 through 12, you need to score the most fantasy points possible. Like we're taking the running backs over the other positions at that point.
Yeah, there's just a much higher chance that those guys are going to hit big for you. And there are some receivers in that range that I do like. I just did the receiver preview episode with Ryan Heath on the Score Fantasy Football podcast. That just
Nice.
went up the other day. So I recommend people check that out. We talked about some sleepers that are going in that range at receiver that you can take. But I even mentioned on the receiver preview episode that I want to take running backs at that spot in the draft. I think that's just the much smarter way to go. And you see it even during the season, right? When you talk about the waiver wire moves that you're going to make, I'm often trying to pick up those backs that are stepping into number two roles. It's not always the injury to the number one back that's important. Sometimes you see a number two back get hurt, and then you want to go look who's the number three guy who's stepping into that number two role that you can now grab. You can get a little bit of value there. Maybe people aren't on him yet. And you grab him early before he actually gets that opportunity. It's another move in Dynasty, too, right? Everybody wants to focus on the number one backs and the backups. But hey, let's go look at those number three guys that they might need two injuries to get out there,
Yep.
but all of a sudden their value is going to be much higher than carrying that really deep receiver prospect that you're just holding out hope that he's going to come through for you. I'd rather load up my bench in Dynasty too with even number three backs because I think the value could be higher with them.
Great shout out there. So, also just going back to the original 101 CMC point. Yeah, you said it, man. Not really many repeat champions. Guys, quick little trivia game here. Who was the last overall PPR RB1 to repeat in fantasy football? I'll give you 1 second, 2 second, 3 seconds. Priest Holmes back in 2002 and 2003. Over 20 straight years of a different RB1 each and every year. Now, we've had plenty of guys, LT, CMC, Austin Eckler's finished like RB1, then RB2. Not like every single guy is busting, but really is a wild stretch that we have going there. So, Justin, for the next question, you cannot take CMC, but other than CMC, what single running back are you prioritizing in your home draft? Because, sickos like us, when we're in 20 different leagues through the year, no, we aren't, necessarily going to every single draft trying to draft the exact same players because, shocker, everyone, we aren't always 100% right with what we're trying to predict here in August for it to go down for the rest of the season. But Justin, for your home league, you got to win this bragging rights over the buddies. What running back do you need? Not even one. What running back do you need to walk away with?
Yeah, the guy who, like, when he gets drafted and it's not me taking him, I'm like, man, I missed out on that
Yeah.
value. It's James Conner. I mentioned him earlier, and I know he's getting up there. He's 29 years old. I know he's got the durability concerns. He's missed 4 games each of the last 2 seasons. They just drafted Trey Benson, who I think is definitely going to be the long term solution there. But I don't think they drafted him to be that long term solution this year. I think they had him in mind as a potential insurance policy this season and as the guy that can take over maybe next year or moving forward when Connor's eventually done. And you look at what Connor's done. I know he's gotten hurt, of course, but when he has been out there, he's put up top 10 fantasy running back stats on a per game basis each of the last 3 years since he got to Arizona. That's the kind of back you're getting. And I'm not worried about him potentially missing a few games. A lot of running backs miss a few games. I can fill those. I'm not taking a zero those weeks. I'll find somebody else in those weeks. And I might even be able to get Trey Benson, who goes several rounds later, and
Yep.
pair the two up. I think that's a really smart approach this season. And you lock down that Cardinals backfield, which we know can be very productive. I'm excited about them. Last year, Kyler Murray missing part of the season coming back from the injury. When he got back, he looked pretty good. They add Marvin Harrison Jr. So you expect that this offense is really starting to take a step forward, that they're going to come together. I just don't understand why you can still get Connor at like the 7-8 turn when he's in your lineup. He's probably going to give you a top 10, maybe top 15 running back numbers. He is a workhorse. I'm not super excited about any of the other guys. I know they're talking about Trey Benson's trying to fight right now with Michael Carter and Amari Demercado. But that
Yeah.
tells you Benson's still proving himself as the number two. We're not getting the reports that he's challenging Connor for the starting job at the moment. So that's yet another reason to take Connor, and you get him in the 7-8 turn, come back in like the 10th round or so, which is the ADP for Benson, and throw him on your bench. And now you have a very, very solid RB2 spot, and you got it at an incredibly cheap price. Like, I just don't get it. Is there something I'm missing on Connor, Ian? Like, why is he going so late? Why is he going behind some of these other guys like Aaron Jones and even like Alvin Kamara, who I know has a pretty good ceiling, but Kamara, we can see some of these numbers declining with him. We can see that maybe he's making that turn towards a worse stage in his career. what am I missing about Connor?
I don't think people have made a habit of grinding all these Cardinals games over the last few years, which I don't necessarily blame you guys. There's been better football to watch. But yeah, man, it's like James Conner. Like if we gave his efficiency numbers and we can almost see it, like look at Kyron Williams and all the hype that he got. I understand Kyron outscored James Conner, but it's like that meme of like, the creepy dude in the office getting HR called on him. Like that's James Conner averaging 5 yards per carry. But when Kyron Williams does it, he's the cool guy who is getting all the attention of everyone. So I'm with you, man. It's like he has this reputation as being a boring runner, even though when you actually watch him, like he's crossing back over the field. He was one of the most explosive running backs last year. Like I know Madden gave my man's, a bad speed rating. So I'm sorry about all you guys trying to make that happen, over in the video game world. But in real life, man, he's been consistently one of just the biggest yearly boomers in terms of just getting past ADP. Essentially, he's like the Tyler Lockett of running backs at this point, and I'm pretty sure we aren't hitting the end just yet, like we saw with Lockett last season. So, 100% with you, man. I mean, he's going RB 23 right now in ESPN drafts, and if that's not enough, pick 82. I mean, he's going next to Zamir Wright, next to Jonathan Brooks, next to Jalen Warren. Like, if you had to pick a running back, Justin, where it's just, okay, where are they going in drafts and who's going to be the biggest risers once it's time for week one? And we actually have to rank these guys, not for the rest of the season, but in terms of who we are ranking in week one. James Conner could very well be a top 12 running back as soon as we get to week one because I don't know, man. That's pretty much all he's ever been since he joined the Cardinals.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that you're gonna draft him, and then when it comes time to like set your lineup for week one, and I'm not a big fan of some of the projections on some of the sites, they do get a
Yeah.
little silly. But he's one of those guys that you're gonna draft at that spot at the 7-8 turn, and then you're gonna set your lineup in week one and find out that yeah, he's projected to be like the 10th best running back that week or something, and you're gonna be so happy that you listened to us and that you actually took him. So definitely follow that advice.
Again, RB8, RB9, RB13 over these past three seasons and PPR points per game. Healthy Kyler Murray under center. Yes, Kyler is a mobile quarterback, and we've talked about those concerns, but unlike the Jalen Hurtses and the Anthony Richardsons of the world, aren't exactly seeing him being used as this, weapon inside the 5 yard line where they're trying to make Kyler take too many extra hits. So again, Trey Benson, very good handcuff. I'm not worried about Amari DiMercado taking the handcuff job at all, but the fact that Benson hasn't been able to really challenge DiMercado for some of that, just a couple of snaps of pass down work, I think tells you all you need to know. James Conner, running back, the running back, y'all. Don't leave your drafts without him. But yeah, if you are going to go ahead and get some drafts in now, why not do it over with our friends at DraftKings? Guys, I freaking love DraftKings Sportsbook. And whether you've been watching your favorite team from the screen at home or the ballpark in the stands, there's an even better way to get on the action. Check out our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers who bet just $5 will instantly get $150 back in bonus bets. All you got to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our promo code FantasyLife. And if I do have one suggestion for you guys, is to watch this UFC fight night over on Saturday. The main card is going to kick off at 3 p.m. Eastern time, Abu Dhabi time, to get in the love. Sorry, British fans that had to, watch your own freaking home fights at 1 or 4 a.m. or however late that was. But anyway, main event's an absolute banger. This bantamweight division, for my money's worth, is probably the deepest in all of the UFC. 135 pounds of absolute maniacs out there. And seeing Corey Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov, absolute banger of a fight. So really could be a number one contender matchup. I mean, having Sean O'Malley, or him or Marab could very easily fight the winner of this one. And yeah, guys, I think that Nurmagomedov name is making Umar a bit too high in the odds. I love Sandhagen at plus 240 and just don't really think that we're going to see Umar have all that many answers for Sandhagen on the feet and maybe even on the ground, where Sandhagen has really seemingly improved ever since catching, that loss or two he had a few years back. So Corey Sandhagen, that's my pick. And again, you can get $5 turned into 150 in bonus bets instantly. All you got to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our promo code FantasyLife. Remember, the crown is yours. All right, Justin, we've said a lot of good things about running backs. I like to think that, we're going to be right about them. That's the goal, after all. We put in a lot of hours to try to figure this stuff out for all of you lovely listeners out there. But let's face it, things don't always go 100% for us. And we are also in the business of sometimes fading running backs on the board. So out of the fades that you've made a habit of doing, personally, I haven't drafted much Zamir White throughout this offseason. What fade, though, scares you the most, where you haven't been drafting the guy, but, when you sit there, when you're doing some of your research, you're like, man, I can see the path to success. I can see how I might look back in 3 months and say, what was I thinking?
I don't know how you feel about this guy, but it's definitely Derrick Henry for me. Like, I
Ooh,
feel like we've been predicting that drop off for him for what, like 2 or 3 seasons now. Like, it's just like,
yeah.
okay, bigger back. He's getting a little bit older. There's no way he can keep this up. And yet he continues to produce. And now he just seems like a perfect fit going to that Ravens offense. I mean, Gus Edwards last year had 13 rushing touchdowns. Like, even if Henry doesn't put up huge yardage, which he certainly could, he could still get there just on his touchdown scoring in that offense, right? So he could easily do that. Ryan Heath, who I mentioned earlier, who was on my show this week, he did an excellent age curve study last year talking about not necessarily the age guys were when they dropped off, but the amount of seasons that they're in the league before they start to drop off a little bit. And his work showed that running backs entering year 9 in the NFL tend to produce around 62% of their career baseline fantasy production. That's where Derrick Henry is right now. And at the same time, Ian, I'm sitting here going like he could just be like a Greek god. He could just be a guy that is never going to drop off and we just continuously get this wrong. And he goes out in this Ravens offense and they overcome some of the offensive line issues where I think they've downgraded there a little bit this year, but everything could just come together playing next to Lamar Jackson. And he could go out there and put up a huge season, a good yardage total, a good touchdown total. That it's the landing spot and just the fact that Henry's the kind of guy that just always seems to prove us wrong. I think whenever we start to get down on him a little bit, are you there with me or have you been drafting him?
When I've been on, because it's still a lot of my drafts at this point have been best ball, and when you get just the kind of underdog discount where I can get Henry in round 3, okay, I'm more willing to sign up for that. But as a top 16, top 17 pick and redraft, I'm kind of with you, man. Where I don't see myself going out of my way to get him, especially if we're still going to have some of these top 10, top 11 wide receivers on the board at that point, because there are at least a few red flags that maybe we aren't giving enough credit to. I mean, yes, guys, Gus Edwards scored 13 touchdowns last season. That was awesome. But what do you think a guy that scored 13 touchdowns would finish better than the RB 32 in PPR points per game? I mean, this is the reality of fantasy football, especially in full PPR scoring, where if you don't catch passes, man, you really do need to be one of the more efficient backs on the ground and you need to be scoring a bunch of touchdowns. It's almost like the crazy thing I mentioned last week where Tua Tagovailoa leads the NFL in passing yards last year and he's the QB 19 in fantasy land. Because as much as I do think fantasy leaderboards generally do a good job reflecting, who's the best players in real life, we do see receiving running backs and mobile quarterbacks really be the two kind of just code breakers in terms of what we expect to see from that translation. So I thought the offensive line question mark was a great point because it's one of those things where we just always assume it's the Ravens, well coached, they got Lamar Jackson, they should be fine. And last year they finished with PFF's fifth best offensive line, but as Dwayne McFarland and myself highlighted on the Ravens team preview pod, only 2 of 5 starters are returning, and PFF actually has their 2024 offensive line rankings out, and the Ravens just come in at 25th, man. So yes, it does seem like there's a chance that Derrick Henry goes in there, he's getting 20 plus carries per week, and we're sitting here in week 6 just going, oh yeah, it's Derrick Henry with Lamar Jackson getting 20 plus carries per game. Like, how did this possibly go wrong? But, as much as Todd Monken has said he could see himself giving Henry 300 carries, also said he wants to keep those other running backs involved. Then, if we do see Henry go in there, let's face it, didn't get this $50 million contract where we're just uberly confident he's going to get fed 30 plus touches per week or whatever. I mean, Gus Edwards had 198 carries last year. That's a disaster if we see that number for Henry and he finishes closer to 200 than 300. But honestly, man, that's been the case in Baltimore. I mean, this backfield's 26th and 20th, I believe, in expected PPR points per game. Mark Ingram scored 15 touchdowns back in, 2019, that great season they had going. But otherwise, haven't really seen a great running back emerge out of Baltimore, at least in terms of fantasy land. Haven't seen one out of Philly as well. That is life when you got some of these dual threat quarterbacks. So, when it comes down to it, and then we're making those bets, I think the one to make is what you said earlier, Jonathan Taylor, because we don't have to worry about the age. And also with Anthony Richardson, it's not a given he's going to be uber involved near the goal line. But yeah, man, not ideal with Derrick Henry. But with all that said, it is scary as hell to fade the guy.
I mean, he's on the wrong side of 30 now. Like at some point, he's not quite at that Raheem Mostert age. He's a couple years behind him, but at some point the wheels fall off for everybody. And I really hope that this isn't the season that it happens for Henry. I'll take the L here. And it's not that I have him ranked like super low or anything. It's just that when I get to drafts, I don't often click his name. I'm scared off by him a little bit, and I tend to be going receiver in that range or going in other directions. So, yeah, that is one that I could see myself, a few weeks into the season messaging you and going like, yeah, I was so wrong on that, man. Never doubt Henry.
Hangover. We messed up big time out here. But yeah, again, depending on the site. Look, sleeper, Derrick Henry, going pick 25.8. If I can get him at the, 2-3 turn as my hero running back, yes, sign me up. But pick 18 on ESPN, pick 15 over at Yahoo. That's just a point where it seems like the price is not quite as right for me there. So not all in on King Henry. What could go wrong? Well, a lot could go wrong, exactly, actually. But all right, guys. So moving on, two more big topics we want to get through. Dynasty, Lance, something you mentioned, Justin, something that we compete in every year in the International Dynasty League. Always a fun time over there. But is there a buy low running back that you love in Dynasty at the moment that hopefully I can steal from one of our league mates before you do?
You might be able to, because if I remember correctly, I think Derek Brown has him, and I think he's had him on the
Ooh.
trade block for a while. But I never know with Debro. Debro, maybe he's going to compete this year. Maybe he'll hang on to him. But it's Ramondre Stevenson, and if you're
Ooh,
looking for like the discounts at running back, you're rarely going to get it on the younger guys because everybody's going to get excited about them. You're going to get it on the guys that are a little bit older. And I think Ramondre is like sneaky older, right? Like he's 26 years
26.
old. Yeah, like that's a little bit older than I think people might realize because it doesn't seem like he's been around for that long. And he kind of has like the public perception on him reminds me of like the way the public perception was several years back on like David Montgomery and Josh
Yeah.
Jacobs, who are also guys that I went out and traded for in Dynasty before they kind of had their bigger seasons because they were producing. They didn't necessarily at that time seem to have, top 5 fantasy running back upside. They might not be going to win you your league, but they were guys that you could slot in as your RB2 and could probably flirt with RB1 production. And I think Stevenson is now in that range. And it goes back to some of the things I said before about him, because in Dynasty, I don't need to worry as much about the offensive line being bad this year, let's say, or, things like that. I can take a little bit of a longer view, look out 2, 3 years maybe, and see that this team is going to get a little bit better. Again, my opinion, like you said, knock on some wood here. Maybe it could get worse, but I think things are going to get better with them starting to figure out the quarterback situation, hopefully, and with them having some of these other weapons that I think generally we're pretty excited about, right? Jalen Polk and Baker and some of these other guys that they have now that they can throw to downfield, where one of the problems they had in the offense before was they just really didn't have any quality pass catchers that they could throw to.
Yeah.
So I think overall the offense is going to get better. And I think that's going to help Stevenson. And the fact that they did give him that contract makes me more interested in, okay, the team is now committing to him. I'm willing to go out and see if I can get him a little bit cheaper. And he's got to be a guy. Like, I don't know how much people are going to be asking. I don't know what Debro necessarily wants for him in that league. We're both probably going to rush out and try to trade for him at this point. But I think that offense is going to get better. And I think that will help Stevenson's outlook in the public eye. And then as soon as he comes out and starts to have some good games, and as soon as that public perception shifts, then you turn around and you trade him again. Because that's what you should do with running backs in Dynasty. When they start to have those big years and they are kind of at that 25, 26 age, then you can turn around and sell him. But I think for Stevenson right now, his value is depressed because of the situation with the Patriots and because he's coming off a not great year. But you go back the year before, he was the RB14 in fantasy points per game in half
Yeah.
PPR. So he's shown us that he can do it when the situation's a little bit better. And I think this year it is going to be a little bit better for him. So I'm excited to see him out there this year. And he's certainly somebody that I think it's more of a value game, which is what Dynasty is. So you're trying to go out and get him cheap and then see his price go up and then try to make a little bit on a trade by moving him and seeing if you can get more of a concrete piece, maybe, because I think he's more of maybe a short term look in the next 2 years.
I know he was talking yesterday about just the new Alex Van Pelt scheme and how the more outside zone running style is going back to what he did best at Oklahoma. And how he's a fan of that. And even just looking at the first 2 years in the league, man, this was a situation where it was, almost Josh Jacobs esque, where he didn't actually have as big of a fall off as Jacobs last year. But Stevenson's numbers his first 2 years in the league, man, and most advanced metrics, the missed tackles forced, even just raw yards per carry, one of the better running backs out there. And when you pair that with the proven ability to catch 69 nice passes in a single season, man. Like you just don't see that out of many running backs. And when you look at the disparity in ADP between him and guys like Kyron Williams, like Isaiah Pacheco, like even a James Cook, I don't think those players, like if you swap them and Stevenson, are any better in real life, honestly. Like, okay, maybe a little bit, sure, if you want to go there, but it's more so just the offense right now, which to your point, man, really can't get much worse. So if you do want to buy low on a guy, buy low on the proven workhorse running back who we do think is pretty good at football with the chance to, again, get up there in the higher ADP ranges in future years because there isn't much lower to go. So 36 million reasons why the Patriots should feed this guy the ball as much as possible. The only running backs with a higher total contract value right now are Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, and Alvin Kamara himself. So again, the guy right below Ramondre on that list is Miles Sanders. So just because you're giving a lot of money doesn't mean it's always going to work out. But again, I think we've seen it from Stevenson, and we've seen it just, again, the ability to be that 3-down workhorse running back, and now getting the money to be just that. Yes, Ramondre Stevenson, both a good, again, kind of like mid-round zero RB, a very solid pick in redraft and Dynasty. Go get the man right now, and I'm going to try to beat Justin to that here once we're done. But Justin, great stuff, man. Now, before we get out of here, want you to leave everyone with one bold call on the running back position ahead of 2024. Some might even say your boldest call.
I will keep it tight because we already talked about this player, but Devon Achane going nuclear, channeling his inner Chris Johnson,
Ooh.
staying healthy this season. Mostert doesn't stay healthy. Achane finishes as, like you suggested, that league winning top 3 fantasy back this season. It all comes together and he delivers. And of course, I hate saying that as the Bills fan. Don't get mad at me, all the Bills fans out there. It's okay. I got to stay at least kind of neutral in the fantasy analysis. So I think Achane's going to have that really big year. And I think anybody that drafts him where you can get him now in like the third round often is going to just profit from it. And I think there's a chance that next year we go into the season and he's somebody that's up in the high second round or maybe even flirting with that first round value in 2025 fantasy drafts.
Again, like when we have the opportunity, I know Dwayne McFarland, also one of his guys this year is just Devin Achane, because his point is that you're just buying him closer to his floor than his ceiling. We saw the ceiling last year. It's 50 plus freaking fantasy points in a game. And I almost feel like people have such a hard time wrapping their minds around someone being this good. 7.8 yards per carry. It's the most in NFL history. If you want to go back even further, you can find that someone named Beanie Feathers actually had him beat like in 1932. But regardless, again, insane numbers. So it's one of these things, Justin, where we almost get the like, well, take out his good games or take out the big plays, and look, he's actually not as good. And that analysis pisses me off more than just about anything out there. Because guess what? A lesser player wouldn't have made those big plays in the first place. So yes, Mostert should be staying involved to an extent, but my God, like I wouldn't even rule out the potential for Achan just to end up not lapping Mostert or relegating him as his true backup, but at least becoming the clear RB1 in Miami, and an offense that, oh yeah, we fully expect to be up there with the best in the league. I mean, what if we get Achan providing, I don't know, let's say he averages 2 fewer yards per carry, Justin, only 5.8, but he's actually getting, legit RB1 level workload and getting some of the 18 rushing touchdowns that Mostert was able to get, many of which were inside the 10-yard line. I mean, it would not be shocking if we are sitting here next year and Achan's a top 3 overall pick.
I mean, that might be a little bit shocking, but it's not impossible for sure. Like that's the kind of
Yeah.
ceiling that he has in this, high octane Dolphins offense in that Mike McDaniel system with, as I mentioned, this very easy running back schedule this year. So I don't think I could be more excited about Achan while still acknowledging, and I talked about this on our running back preview episode last week, that there's a floor there too, that he could get hurt, that this could continue to be like that is all possible as well. But that's not why we're playing this. We're playing this to go for that upside, to go for the ceiling plays. And Achan has shown us that he can certainly be that. So why not chase it? And if it doesn't happen for you, it's not going to be the end of the world with him as a third round pick. You're going to be able to still build around those early receivers that you got in the first 2 rounds, and you'll find another running back, and you could still go on and win your fantasy title, even if he doesn't pan out for you.
Fingers crossed. Lord knows I've drafted 8 chan enough. I'm going to go maybe a little bit less spicy, but I do believe that Zach Charbonnet ends up being the superior straight up running back in Seattle when it's all said and done. I'm not expecting Kenneth Walker to get, shafted to be a complete backup or anything like that, but I do think there's a strong case to be made that Walker's, more boomer bust running style is a bit better as a change of pace option, whereas Charbonnet, as we saw in his brief auditions last year, was trusted with the true 3 down role and just looks like the running back who, when the coach schemes things up in their mind and they run it in practice, Charbonnet more often than not is actually helping that come to life versus Walker, who, yes, guys, the highlights are a lot of fun. I've seen the one against San Francisco last year where he's, cutting back across the field 3 times. I'm going to look really dumb when he does that in week 1 and looks like one of the best players at the position. I get it. The guy can do some cool stuff out there, but, similar draft capital, new offense. I do have concerns about the offensive line, so I'm not saying Charbonnet is going to turn into this top 5 running back or anything. But if we are looking around the league and saying what, RB2 on their current squad, or at least what RB2 that we're treating that way in ADP could realistically beat out the starter, man, Justin, I know you mentioned him kind of in the RB strategy, but I think Charbonnet, man, out of all those handcuffs going in that range, has the best chance of actually going out and just, yanking away that starting job on his own team.
And you nailed it. I mean, I don't think people are talking enough about the fact that they change coaching staffs and you have a new coaching staff come in. They're going to totally evaluate these guys and see who fits their scheme and go from there. They're not just going to necessarily pick up where things left off. So, yeah, Walker has that home run ability. Very exciting player. He is not going by the wayside by any means. But I'm with you that that is definitely a possibility that Charbonnet, who probably is a better pass catcher, who looked pretty good, like I said earlier, in his opportunities last year, that he can impress this new coaching staff and that he could carve out a role, maybe make this a 50-50 backfield, or maybe start to kind of edge out Walker a little bit. And they could continue to use Walker and maybe take advantage of some of that home run ability by playing him a little bit less and keeping him fresh. I think that would be potentially smart on their end, but we'll see how it works out. I hope that you're right because I have a lot of Charbonnet in Dynasty.
Justin Boone, ladies and mostly gentlemen, let's be honest, but lead fantasy analyst at the score at Justin Boone on Twitter. Thank you so much, my friend. Let the people know any other cool subjects or whatever you want to get off your chest there over at the score.
Yeah, download the Score app. It's free, not just for my fantasy
Ooh.
content, but for all the awesome stuff that we have going on over there. We got our fantasy football draft kit, which is also free. Go check that out. My rankings, trade value charts, all the strategy stuff, players to target. It's got everything you need in there. Score Fantasy Football Podcast, which we're up to 3 episodes a week. We'll be going to 5 pretty soon as the season gets near. Lots of awesome guests on that one. We're going to have to get Ian on soon, like we always do every season. Yeah, check that out. And as you mentioned on Twitter, come follow me at Justin Boone. Ask questions. We're getting to that time of year. Everybody's drafting, and it's just so fun to talk to everybody and to try to help where we can, right, Ian? That's what we're here for. We're just trying to be those guides. We don't want to make all the decisions for you, but I love talking to people, trying to teach people how I'm thinking, and then trying to help them just become better fantasy players.
It's draft season. Let's go, everyone. Fantastic stuff, Justin. Fantastic stuff from you listening at home. Always appreciate you guys. So, wide receiver week coming up here on the Fantasy Life show next. But otherwise, yeah, just have a great freaking weekend. Full slate of preseason action coming up. Football's in the air, and I absolutely love it. So, for Justin, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life show. And until next time, take care, everybody.